All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa Giocomo. I'm a professor in neurobiology here at Stanford University, and it is my pleasure to moderate this panel this afternoon with three fantastic panelists. So our first panelist is James Landay. Dr. Landay is a professor of computer science at Stanford University and co-founder and co-director of the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence, or HAI. Dr. Landay specializes in human-computer interaction, and his current research interests include technology to support behavior change, demonstrational user interfaces, mobile computing, cross-cultural interface design, human-centered AI, and user interface design tools. And as a way of just a brief introduction, if you could share with the audience something that you recently learned about either AI, neuroscience, or both, that would be great.
So obviously I'm not a neuroscientist, and I haven't been here all day, so I couldn't just pick up something from that. And most of my AI friends would say I'm not an AI scientist either, which is quite true. So, but I did hear a result today that I somehow missed, that I don't know why I didn't see it, which was researchers at Google have shown now with just an off-the-shelf Android phone, they can do eye tracking of a user looking at the phone with as good quality as a $30,000 head-mounted eye tracker. And I think that's going to open up lots of interesting research directions to be able to understand what somebody's looking at, as well as it's influenced large models to be able to understand, what someone might look at.
Very cool, very cool. Thank you. Our second panelist is Laura Gwilliams. She is an assistant professor of psychology and a faculty scholar at the Tsai Neuroscience Institute and Stanford Data Science. And Dr. Gwilliams studies the neural computations that give rise to language comprehension in the human brain using time-resolved human neural recordings across spatial scales, from single neurons, cortical columns, and region-wide structures. Her work leverages AI systems, particularly speech and large language models, as hypothesis generators for the computations that the brain may also use to process speech and language. And if you want to share something that you learned about AI, neuroscience, or both, that'd be great.
Well, I learned a lot today already. One thing that I was really impressed by in Doris's talk is that even with a fairly simple, fully feed-forward vision model like AlexNet, we can, with pretty simple tools of dimensionality reduction, discover the important dimensions of object recognition that also seem to map onto the human brain. And the simplicity of that I found very elegant.
Very cool. Thank you. Okay, and our third panelist is Dan Yamins. Dr. Yamins is an associate professor of psychology and computer science, as well as a faculty scholar at the Tsai Institute. And Dr. Yamins' research lies at the intersection of neuroscience, artificial intelligence, psychology, and large-scale data analysis. His lab is focused on understanding how the brain solves computational challenges, which can lead to building better artificial intelligence algorithms, and by improving artificial intelligence algorithms, discovering models of how the brain works. His lab studies these questions using computational modeling, artificial intelligence, high-throughput neurophysiology data, functional brain imaging, and large-scale data analysis. And Dan, same question to you.
Oh, well, one of the things I'm really happy to see is just how many people are here today and how popular the topic is. I sort of have been seeing the field for a period, and it's just amazing to see how people are becoming more and more comfortable with the idea that computational models are a critical aspect of thinking about neuroscience, and that you can think of a model and the construction of the model as a legitimate neuroscience hypothesis is something that I don't think is totally universally accepted yet, but is becoming more and more comfortable for people. And I think that's a theme that I've seen throughout today that was really exciting for me.
Great, awesome, thank you. Okay, so to kick it off, I'm going to start with some questions from the past, and then I'll move to the present and then the future. So over the last 50 years, neuroscience has really played a role in shaping some components of AI. And early AI models like artificial neural networks were even took inspiration by the structure and function of the human brain. For example, Hebbian learning, which is sometimes summarized as cells that fire together, wire together, have influenced early AI learning algorithms and continue to inspire research into more advanced neural networks. So my question for the panel is how do you see, or what do you see as the most important contributions that neuroscience has made to AI? Or another way to put it is how has neuroscience informed the development of AI over the past half century?
Can maybe start. It's like one of the early and really breakthrough kind of translations was taking the idea of visual convolution and the basis functions of receptive fields in vision and implementing these in vision models. The kind of direct injection of these same receptive fields was really a breakthrough for vision that I think has like carried through, and we still see those types of representations being used today.
Well, there's a long history, right? So probably much more than we have time to talk about. But I feel like there was some kind of originally some intersection of electrical engineering and neuroscience. Back with Enroth Kugel and people, John Robson, and those basically implementing, ideas from electrical engineering and realizing that those help you think about problems in vision, and kind of that combination of ideas that you could do like signal processing and think about information processing with neurons was something that really both helped in neuroscience, and then I think really helped push neural networks forward, right? I think there's no doubt that complex of science did influence the building of neural networks. And of course, you're right that a little later the importation of convolution, and in particular the multi-layer convolution. I think that if you talk to the people who first built convolutional neural networks, they very much think of that as being an idea that they themselves imported from neuroscience. And then also the idea that the operations beyond the linear parts, the nonlinear divisive normalizations, just the idea of normalization, those things were things that really were important historically, and they are definitely, hierarchical things with simple layers that do like some kind of linear combination plus nonlinear. That's an idea that really came out of that science and is the foundation of neural networks. I think it's been a little sparser in the past 10 years. Mm-hmm. And I almost have the feeling of once you've found the right language, it's actually easier to do development of AI as a kind of computational experiment rather than a neuroscience experiment. Mm-hmm. And so maybe by virtue of those early things that were learned from science, now the field on the AI side can move fast enough internally that there may not be a lot of, I haven't seen in the last 10, 15 years all that much talk back from neuroscience into AI neural building. Although, maybe the way that will come back is through the kinds of ideas that Andreas and others have been talking about, like basically fitting neural networks to brain data, and then even if you don't have a word model of the mechanism ahead of time, you learn the mechanism into the model, and it can do things that you didn't program it in your mind to do. So that could be a very potentially interesting way that neuroscience could help impact AI again. But this is a regular Twitter debate question, which is, how is neuroscience helpful for AI now? And I will say I think the last 15 years have been more sparse than the 15 or 20 years previous to that in terms of, I think it's been going the other way more recently.
Great.
I personally think people get caught up in this is not really how the brain works, and this is, a different model. But I think it's clear that just that basic idea that influenced AI neural nets today it has changed computation. Like, we're having to teach computer science students a different way to think about computation than how we have taught them for 75 years. So that's a major change, and I think maybe we'll get into it more in your further questions of what Dan just said, but I think we're going to see now a lot of back and forth, whether it's happening this year or happens in 5 years. The potential for us to both learn from neuroscience for better intelligent algorithms, as well as using intelligent algorithms to learn about the brain, is kind of really the place where we're now. Clearly it's happening, and whether we get the big breakthrough this year or it takes 5 years, hard to always predict those things, but to me this is clear what's happening.
Yeah, and I think I want to build on some of those themes with my next question, which is to just highlight that as AI has evolved and changed, it's diverged from biological systems or models. And while it sometimes uses architectures that are sort of loosely inspired by the brain, it differs significantly in terms of scale, processing speed, complexity. And so for the panel, my questions are if there are particular aspects of brain function that AI systems have failed to replicate or really diverged from. And sort of a follow-up on that is how you think the relationship between these two fields will evolve in the future.
I can go first again. I think there were a few ways that also came up in today's talk, like the idea that synaptic connections in the brain are not fixed, which allows for these different neural codes even within the time course of a few hundred milliseconds, whereas once you've trained your neural network, the weights are what they are. So I think that that's one place where there's clearly a difference in the dynamic abilities of the biological system versus the more static functionality of artificial systems. And I think we also see this in the architecture as well to a certain extent. So when a human is born, they have like the basis of an architecture, but as the brain develops, the connectivity and the architecture evolves in order to best accommodate whatever behaviors it is that they're trying to do. Whereas that's not so obviously true for artificial networks, other than the training process itself. The architecture itself is more fixed.
I like to think about it. Again, I'm not an expert in the brain or the AI, so I can't say what features. It's obviously the hardware substrate is different, but I like to think about performance differences that would lead to things. So the one that's the biggest out there, I think, on anyone's mind is power. The brain able to do all this stuff with, I don't know, what is it, 20 watts? Versus we're going to burn up 3% or 10% of the planet's energy, depending who you talk to, with AI, which is clearly not sustainable or possible. And so, how do we learn better? Okay, how is it that efficient? Can we learn from that and come up with new algorithms? Which, there's clearly a need from our planet's future, as well as just you can't make money if you're spending all the money buying electricity for it. So these parameters are where I think the interesting place lies for us.
Yeah, if I can quickly hop on that too, I feel like there's a difference between saying that you've built a model that is matched behaviorally, but very different to say that it's working with the same power requirements or requires the same amount of data in order to achieve that. So I feel like those two are the real pain points for being able to get a system that you can say is equivalent.
Yeah, I think it's in all of these things. Artificial neural networks still have very substantial behavioral gaps. And so that feels like the way that somehow cognitive science can help us. And I always draw on that as inspiration and also as like a concrete quantitative target. But also, so the behaviors are not there. The learning is not there. The power usage is a big issue. We think about that a lot in our group now. So, behavior and biophysics together are going to be really important. So I guess so it's like an operating procedure is figure out where the gaps are and try to fill them in a bit. And then the hope is that will give us increasingly better AI, and also by virtue of that, better quantitative neural models that you can do stuff with, whether it's for biomedical purposes or otherwise. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I want to pivot a little bit to something that was raised in a number of talks today, which is how AI can be used as a tool for neuroscience discovery, which I think is a really exciting, well, I'm a neuroscientist, so I think it's a really exciting application of AI as a tool. And so as we heard today in many of the talks, AI is really transforming neuroscience research in a lot of profound ways. It's accelerating discoveries, it's providing new tools to tackle complex problems, it's allowing us to process and analyze massive data sets, such as those generated by brain imaging, neural recordings, and genomics, and allowing us to uncover patterns that maybe we wouldn't have been able to see just using sort of standard methods. And so my questions for the panel are, what areas of neuroscience do you think can still really benefit the most from further AI advancements or further AI implementations?
All of them.
Well, pick maybe like one or two.
Oh no, I'm serious. I think that they're all, different parts of neuroscience are in different levels of engagement probably with AI. So there's probably more in vision than in somatosensation at the moment or something like that. But I think there's long ways to go in all of those. So there's stuff to be done in vision, and there's stuff to be done in high-level cognition, and there's stuff to be done in motor. And I definitely think it's brain-wide, let's say.
Do you think there's a field in neuroscience, though, that is like on the edge of that distribution where really AI hasn't come into play? Or do you see all of them as having incorporated it, and now they're just at different stages in terms of how deep they've gone with it?
I feel like I'm so familiar with systems neuroscience and so unfamiliar with molecular and cellular neuroscience that I feel like I don't know what is happening on the molecular and cellular side as well as I should. But my impression is that on the one hand, perhaps the AI as explanatory models have been less used there, but also there's a lot of engagement of AI, or at least machine learning, in biology generally. And I suspect that there are people who are doing stuff with molecular and cellular data and neuro that are quite engaged. So I feel like I actually think I don't know. I'm very curious to hear what people think about that.
I guess would be more of the characterization of the kind of work, So ones that generate large amounts of data and need to deal with that are obviously probably more quick to use these tools rather than areas that are thinking about things more theoretically.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited about the use of AI models for understanding functions that only humans up until this point have been able to achieve, like language, as Andreas said earlier, which is already being done. I wouldn't say that this is at the edge of the distribution where AI is not being used to understand neuroscience, but I think that this is one of the places where it's really going to allow the field of human neuroscience to catch up with understanding cognitive processes that are also possible in animal models. So in the case of, vision, you can look at that in humans, but you can also then go and do experiments in animals that you wouldn't do in humans. And I see certain language models essentially as the animal model that we can go and use to run experiments and then as a hypothesis generator for what we might then see in the human brain.
Great, thanks. So maybe going a little bit further on Dan's comment that all areas of neuroscience could incorporate more AI. I think most neuroscientists would agree that AI has the potential to revolutionize neuroscience research, but there are challenges that prevent sort of the seamless integration of these fields. And so I wonder for the panel what you see as some of the biggest challenges or barriers for neuroscience or science research in effectively utilizing AI.
Computation is the one that, I'm sure a lot of researchers here at Stanford realize that just having access to enough GPUs to do this kind of work is a big deal. So anybody who's doing big work, they are like, I can't do it with what we have compared to what we might see in private industry where, it's said that Meta has bought up, 350,000 NVIDIA GPUs, and we know that these large language models are trained on tens of thousands. And, here on the campus, I don't know if anybody's done an actual study on how many are around, but it's probably in the low hundreds, or maybe it's low thousands if they're all spread across independent labs. Getting access to the amount of computation people need is a big problem for any of this work.
Yeah, I would say that interpretation is still a challenge, that you might have a really powerful model that can explain neural time series perfectly, but then actually going back and then trying to understand how it is, so like why it is that it's such a powerful model, I think still is a gap that needs to be filled.
Yeah, just practically speaking, I'm with James also that we're several orders of magnitude off from where we should be now if we wanted to do the kinds of things that we can conceive now as being most impactful. And then that gap will only grow as more things become possible. So, universities pay for buildings, and they pay for faculty and a few other things very centrally. And my feeling is computation is going to be one of the top 2 or 3 things that universities will be needing to invest in, period.
And I think that's a big worry too, if researchers start to not even think about those possible research directions, because they immediately eliminate it, thinking, well, where would I get the computation? So I don't even think of that. I think about only the things that I can do in the small. And that will really limit us, and it will limit us also if people, decide I don't want to become a professor at a, place like Stanford. I need to go to one of these big companies because I need the computation to do what I want. And I think that will impact our training of future scientists. So that's a big issue. I think a secondary thing on this is just, somebody goes into neuroscience because that's what they're interested in. Now I'm saying you need to learn all this other stuff to be effective, and that's a problem for all of science, because all of science is starting to use these tools. And so, we need to make sure that we're having the right courses that can help people get there, rather than thinking, oh, I need to do a whole other degree to be able to do what I want, which is probably not the efficient way to do it.
On the flip side then, do you see are there also barriers that you see in terms of AI scientists wanting to engage more with the neuroscience side or the biology side? Or does it seem like AI may have reached a point where it doesn't need to rely on inspiration from neuroscience as much to achieve breakthroughs?
I think one point there is we need larger neural data sets to be able to really leverage the models to pull out the breakthroughs that we can learn from neural data. And yeah, I think we're limited in the discoveries that we can make from neural data by having such small data sets.
But even if it turned out that you didn't really need to do neuroscience at this point to get inspiration, doing neuroscience and having models of the brain is incredibly important for its own right. And not only for basic science purposes, but for brain biomedical purposes of all kinds. And so I think we shouldn't feel that we have to justify neuroscience by virtue of its being able to do direct inspiration of AI. And we shouldn't be nervous if it turned out that you can actually think about AI as a theoretical thing, make a model, make progress on it, and then help do stuff in neuroscience without necessarily having to read the neuroscience journals. That's not necessarily a bad situation. It's different than I think people have hoped or considered of it for a long time. But even if it turned out that neuroscience didn't inspire AI going forward, neuroscience has so much value for its own sake that, and in particular, there's just no route between, AI and helping solve diseases in the brain that doesn't go through neuroscience. That we should be very comfortable with that being a big focus. And so most of my students, many of them are from CS, and they're AI scientists, but every one of them is really interested in applying those things into neuroscience because they can see it's such a valuable endpoint in and of itself, even if they're not looking to neuroscience as a conceptual inspiration as such.
So I don't see this as a problem in general. Obviously there's only so many computer scientists to go around at least till we get some more slots from the dean. So, there might not be enough people, given there's a lot of interesting poems that people will want to naturally work on. On the other hand, the brain, how does the human brain work? What is intelligence? These are some of the biggest questions of science, and obviously a large percentage of people are interested in those kind of questions, and so you will always attract, just like Dan saying, his CS PhD students in his lab. So I think there are people where, they're attracted to the biggest questions over time. And even in our conception of HAI, those three letters, H, A, and I, stand for something. So H is, we need to understand the human impact of AI before, during, and development. A is, we should augment people rather than replace them. But I is about the human brain being the most complex device in the known universe. Maybe there's some alien thing we haven't found yet. And we should both learn from it to inspire new algorithms in AI, because we don't think deep learning is the be-all, end-all algorithm of intelligent systems, but also we should use AI to learn about the human brain. So even from our start, we see that as a dual that we need to be involved in, and we try to fund research on both sides of that question.
Yeah, and that kind of nicely leads to my next question, which is whether or not the rise of AI, you feel, kind of challenges neuroscience now to tackle some of its great unanswered questions, such as the nature of intelligence, creativity, or even consciousness.
I think challenge might be the wrong word, as much as, there's, the big deal about deep learning and AI over the last 10 years is, we've been doing AI forever. And all of us who are more users of AI than developing it, we're always coming up with new ideas how we'd use it, but it always disappointed, never quite delivered to prime time. Now the difference is with deep learning since 2014 or so is it's not perfect, but it can do a lot of stuff. So in some ways it's not a challenge as much. Hey, here's an actual tool that you can use. It's not perfect, but it can be useful. So I would think that researchers see another tool and they're creative to think about, hey, I can tackle a problem that I didn't think I could tackle before. The computation abilities also is clearly letting people attack problems in neuroscience they didn't think they could do 10 years ago, because the computation and data are at a level where they can make a model of a whole brain and try to simulate it, things that you wouldn't have thought of doing 50 years ago.
Yeah, I think that philosophers have been thought experimenting about AGI since before AGI was on really the horizon. So I think that the real pressure point is we're going to have to at least think about it concretely enough to write policies about it and write laws around it. But I think that these questions have always been around, and the fact that they now exist or are closer to existing versus just being a thought experiment, I'm not sure that is such a meaningful distinction, other than when it comes to the practicalities of having to write policies about it.
I think neural networks, for all their faults, are a pretty good natural language, mathematical and computational language for neuroscience, I feel like. It's like, maybe it's not so grand as what happened in physics, but physics, there was a period where people were doing very exciting experimental physics before math got involved, right? A lot of history of physics was like that. But once there was this natural language, I think that really made an explosion in progress. And I have the feeling that it's kind of similar here in neuroscience, that neural networks are close enough in their conception, and they can be made better, incrementally more biological, that I think that there's this natural language, and I feel like that will have the explosive effect. I hope it will have the explosive effect that calculus and a few other things had in physics, basically. So we'll see if that's the case. But is it a challenge? I think it's more like a natural pairing, somehow, like two things that should go together.
I'd also be curious to hear your thoughts in terms of how you see sort of the university versus industry playing a role in sort of the evolution of both AI and neuroscience and its interaction in the future.
Well, I mean, I think the advantage of the university is the diversity of fields that are represented. You know, it's not just science, it's not just technology. We have the humanities, the social science, the arts, and the professional domains. And I think, you know, at least for AI is now being posed as a foundational infrastructure that will be under our healthcare system, under our educational system, under maybe government, if our government ever gets the act together, all of these things. And I think that's something that we would be very careful to cede only to private industry, understanding how it actually even works, because we don't even know how these neural nets, at least at large scale, why they work the way they do. Like, there's lots of scientific questions just even about these AI systems. And if we're going to build our whole societal infrastructure on it, we need to understand it, but we also need to understand it from the different perspectives of the different parts of society. And that's what a university brings to it that you will not see, you know, at a Google or an OpenAI or at a Meta. They're very narrow in terms of what fields and perspectives and motives, right? Their job is to make money. People invest in it, whereas our job is to create knowledge. And that difference is very important, at least for AI. I think neuroscience, there may be some similarities as well in that.
Yeah, I think I was going to say that the motives, having underlyingly different goals and ultimate endpoints in industry and academia, I think that pushes progress in different directions that are complementary. And I think that ultimately the ideal is that there is development both in industry and in academia, but there's also crosstalk and synergy across the two. There are, I know, computational resources, for example, that are going to be available in industry that maybe are less available generally in academic settings. But then also the freedom to ask the question of, okay, why does the system work this way, or why does it do well? I think we have more so that freedom in academia, and so being able to bring those two things together is going to be more than the sum of their individual parts.
Yeah, I think that there is a perception in researchers of it, you know, AI researchers, and maybe to some extent, kind of AI adjacent neuroscience research, that universities are, you know, running second to industry in terms of their ability not just to do like commercial things, but actually to generate knowledge and, you know, fundamental core knowledge in the AI space. And so as a result, I think James kind of implied this earlier, there's not just a brain drain from universities. There are people who just don't even think that they don't even imagine they want to come to the university. Research is so much better in industry. Okay, and many people here, especially students, may have heard of this impression. And, you know, I think universities are going to want to grapple with why that is the case. Partly it's resources, probably, compute resources among them. Maybe it's also other factors about, you know, just the role that people play in universities has so many jobs that they do that it actually may get in the way of their doing any one of them. There's lots of things, okay? I think it's up to universities to figure out how to lead in that context, and this is an interesting moment to see whether or not that will happen. Will Stanford, among places, leverage the fact that it is the premier, like, you know, research organization in Silicon Valley to you know, figure out something to do and some way to leverage those resources to do some great next steps, or does it fall further behind? That's a really interesting question that we'll find out, I think, over the next 10 years or something like that.
And so I think Dan is highlighting some of the issues that we're trying to grapple with. We saw last week that the developers of AlphaFold, won a Nobel Prize in chemistry, and they were doing it from Google DeepMind, along with David Baker, who has more of a traditional research lab at the University of Washington. But if you think about it, they won that by doing a project that required a new kind of science, a team science, a team at scale that had PhD level researchers with the expertise in the domain as well as in AI, but also research engineers who could build those systems at scale and run it at scale to kind of be able to essentially discover the folding for every known protein. I think a place like Stanford, if we want to still be in the run for such kind of Nobel Prizes and be asking those kind of questions, we're going to need to be able to do a science at a different scale. It doesn't mean we still don't have single PI labs or medium-sized projects, but we also should be able to bring together teams of 30 or 40 people, but not all faculty and grad students, also research engineers who are paid at Silicon Valley salaries, so you have the best and the computation to go along with it, and attack some of these big questions, like what is intelligence? Like maybe that requires a team to really work on it rather than a single individual. So the university is going to need to think about how would we support this kind of science in addition to the traditional science that we've had for the last couple hundred years.
Yeah, and I think that leads to another question I had, which is related, and just really in terms of, do you think there are ways that we are going to have to, well, I mean, I'm sure there are ways, but what are the ways that you think we're going to have to maybe change the way we train the next generation of scientists so that they can really leverage this intersection of AI and our understanding of the biology of the brain?
I think it's very difficult to do large-scale research projects in academia. And many of the things you just said implicate larger scale than I think is typically done. And there are some examples. If you talk to I've spent some time talking to academic administrators, and if you talk to them, they'll give particle physics as the premier example of like large-scale projects in science that were sort of mediated through universities. And I wonder, is that a good model for us? I don't know. Certainly, there is daylight, but now there's a big gap between what we typically do in universities and the kinds of projects that have had very substantial impact in industry in terms of team structure, scale, incentives. And I don't know whether neuroscience will go in that direction or not, but it easily could. And if the next Nobel Prize in neuroscience is won through a company, then maybe we will, will be further spurred to think about those issues. We'll see. I hope universities take the initiative.
Well, I want to leave some time for questions from the audience. So I'll end by asking each of you to talk a little bit just about how you see things changing in the next 5 years, or how you would envision or like things to change in the next 5 years in terms of this intersection between AI and neuroscience.
Well, I'm just going to go back with my last answer and say I'm going to envision that we at Stanford, a place that's innovative and changed how research is done, changed how industry is done. We're a place of innovation. We're going to innovate again, and we're going to figure out how to do this team science at scale with the computation that's necessary to tackle some of these big questions. What is intelligence is, a number one question. What is artificial intelligence? And I think in 5 years, I want us to be able to say, not necessarily we've answered that question, but we've got the structures in place to actually attack questions like that in a way where Dan's not worried that only a company could win the Nobel Prize.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see the field of human neuroscience embrace both advances in technology of recording from the human brain and doing so at scale, and two, being able to use AI systems in order to discover how human unique abilities actually come to be in the biological system. And I really feel like right now is the first time in history that we're actually posed to be able to do that. And I think that a 5-year time frame is reasonable to really see some incredible advances.
Basically, I agree with both of you. I think both of those things are true. There's enormous opportunity, and there are some opportunities for growth in the university context that I think will be really important. You know, Andreas was talking about his work, and there's this Enigma project which is happening, and that is a bit larger scale. And my hope is that projects like that will be super successful, and I want to be part of them to make them that way, and be, you know, us as a group be able to do that at Stanford. I think will be, if that can work, I think we will be taking steps towards both of the things that you guys mentioned, and I'm excited to see that happen.
Cool. Well, we have some time for questions from the audience, and I'd like to start with trainees. Trainee questions? Yeah.
Hi. So as you guys were talking about like next few years, future of like industry versus academia, I think a similar field is like drug discovery, in the sense that you have like a part for academia and you have a part for industry, and only industry has the actual resource to, I don't know, bring forth an actual new drug that will be, I don't know, ready to be given to humans. So what do you guys think are the similarities and differences between these two situations? Do you think that resources will come to universities and we'll be able to train foundation models from scratch, just like companies do, or no, we're going to we'll be like more siloed into more exploratory stuff for academia, and never actually do the kinds of things that industry has the resources to do?
So I think, you know, drugs is one analogy. Another one is electronics. So, you know, what could we do fundamentally in EE department versus, you know, the chips that could be made at Intel or one of these large foundry companies. One of the differences I see is the fundamental phenomena for many of those things can still be studied in the university. But at least with these large models, you don't see the phenomena until you're at that scale. And those models are all closed. They're not open source, they're not open data. You don't even know what data they're trained on. And that's a fundamental gap for us to have the knowledge of why they're behaving the way they are. And so that's one big difference I see from some of these other analogies to other industries, where we might say, well, those things left the university and we now have this kind of clean split. And it's okay, they're mainly manufacturing at scale. But one of the problems here is you just don't even see some of these phenomena in the small. And I think we as scientists should not want to cede that ground only to private industry. And so we're going to need to raise the money if we want to be able to build that at least somewhat in that scale. Will we build as large as the largest models? Probably not. But we want to be able to do it at a scale where we start to see the basic scientific phenomena and be able to understand it.
Yeah, I think if we don't build foundation models, you basically are tremendously limiting the kind of research that you can be thinking about. And so I imagine that these investments will get made and that will change. You know, I would say that at this point in my group, we train things that are close in scale to foundation models. So, and that's been a very consistent, concerted effort of investment over the past number of years to be able to both do that from a skills perspective and from a compute perspective. And I think that enables us to do things that we would very much not be able to do otherwise. And the most interesting things we can do are of that form. And I think we'll have to figure out a way to make computation central enough to academic, at least science, but probably even beyond science, certainly, that, you know, those things will be possible. Yeah.
I think there was a question over here.
Have we heard enough from trainees?
Oh, wait, no, I see a trainee back.
Okay.
I think, maybe, I don't know. Are there other trainees? Yeah.
Hi, I have a question. I'd like, James, your last comment that you were making. My question is this: Jensen mentioned that we're not going to need computer programmers, computer scientists in the future, right? Because the AI will be creating the code for us, and so my question is really more about synthetic data and the impact on the field of neuroscience. So if people are leveraging these AI co-pilots to co-create data, right, then how does that impact, you talked about systems, neuroscience, and other cellular and molecular areas. What are your thoughts on the impacts of that? Because when I think about this, I think about how we look at like trend lines when we're looking at computational data, and we say, okay, hey, this is the trend that this is going in, and so maybe we decide that this might be the upper or the lower bounds of some gene therapy or drug discovery or whatever. But if we're co-creating this with synthetic data, we know the trend lines are really kind of not really the truth, if you will. So I kind of wanted you guys to expound on your thoughts around the impacts of synthetic data in the field.
I think it would be good for you to comment on synthetic data and what it will do, but I'll just comment on your initial thing about not needing programmers, because that's been said at every stage of programming for the last 75 years. And what's happened is we've just continually gotten tools that allow you to express what you want at a higher and higher level. You still have to be able to tell this machine what you want it to do. That's programming. Now, whether that will eliminate professional programmers or not, I'm actually doubtful, because it's a way of thinking that can express it and express it in a way that doesn't cause errors and be able to figure out how to find those errors. So maybe it doesn't grow as fast, maybe we don't need as many professionals, or maybe they are more productive, but this whole idea that we won't have programmers, I think, is still a dream for quite a while.
Yeah, on the note of synthetic data, I think if it's a careful simulation of a phenomenon, then I think it can be very helpful. And as long as that is made clear that it is a simulation and not the real thing, then I think that we can actually learn a lot, because you can mess with these models in ways that you can't with a biological system. Like you can turn off a bunch of neurons and see how the behavior changes. And so I think that there's a lot of value in simulations of neural responses of these models. But yeah, as long as it doesn't get mixed up or washed in with the true biological data.
Yeah, synthetic data I think has quite a mixed record of being useful for training models. So I don't think there's any question that the real data is going to be very important for a very long time. And neuroscience data is incredibly central to any endeavor that is going to involve neural networks and AI. Neuroscience and AI, and actually that's a place where academic neuroscience has been very effective, is working to scale data collection. And that's a real strength of neuroscience, and Stanford in particular in neuroscience. And so that's a great bright spot for how science research can be integrated with AI, is the data is, I'm actually saying the non-synthetic data basically. I'm reacting to your question by thinking, actually the non-synthetic data is such an amazing opportunity to take all of these endeavors in a whole variety of interesting directions. And that's actually, if you were to say, well, what will be different in 5 years from now, I think one of the major things that's going to be different is there's going to be a lot more and a lot more types of and really interesting data that people are going to realize that they should collect, because now that they can sort of house that data in some way within a somewhat mechanistic model at the real scale and richness of the brain, at least partially so, that is going to be even more attractive for collecting those types of data, and that's going to be a great opportunity.
I appreciate that, because they said the rate at which we're creating synthetic data is actually almost usurping the non-synthetic data that we have.
Yeah. Well, that's maybe true on the internet for text data or something, but certainly in neuroscience, the true data, the real data is is the central thing, and we can have that. We can get that thing. We can really make a lot of progress on that. So.
Other trainee questions? I see one over here. Oh, I think there were two back there. So.
Thank you so much for sharing. I have a question related to the scaling law. So I guess a lot of the discussion right now about like the concern for computing power is really caused by the scaling law of language of like those AI systems. My question is, do you envision that the scaling law can be overturned in the near or far future? And if there are signs that the scaling law can be overturned, what could be the possible necessary signs for possible paradigm shift and some insights from neuroscience that could be helpful here?
I mean, I think nothing grows forever, so we'll see. We've already seen, at least if we just look at how large models are being released, they've slowed down in terms of how often and how big a leap that we see in terms of their performance. I think people can debate about, when do we asymptote just by throwing more data, or whether there is actually no more data and it truly starts to become, you need better algorithms and better models to do it. So I don't think the field has any kind of consensus of when this happens or not. Some are more pessimistic and other people are like, nope, just throw more data, get bigger, and it will get better. And I'm taking the under on that, but not clear what the signs might be. I don't know. I'm watching just kind of how often are things released and what kind of, improvement do we see.
I think you've rephrased one central question in science just in a slightly different language. So you can think of the scaling law as for a particular class of models or a particular problem space as being a statement of like amortized value for what we understand. And so when you say, will that change? I think you're right that like anytime you have an insight, that insight will translate into the change in the scaling law. I think it's almost like an isomorphism. You can have scaling law or you can have understanding, and those are tightly coupled. The more understanding or the better insight you have, the better scaling laws you have. So when you ask that, it's like asking, will there be insights that we can learn from here? And of course, the answer has to be yes to that. There must be some insights that we don't have. But exactly when they'll come and how much they will change the scaling laws it's like that you're saying, like predict the future of science. So it's hard. We'll find out. Yeah.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. I saw one back here.
Hi, thank you. My question is about the open science problem you mentioned. Basically, you said that there is this possibility of collaboration like between industry and academic scientists, but the industrial models are closed models. My question is about policymaking. If universities decide to tackle like these AI challenges, it has to be open science. But even like as it is now, we have deep fakes, we have Creative Commons problems, we have data leakages. So should the policy come before the universities tackle these challenges, or should we have like first a step into this like challenge or this race and then the policy?
I think that's a good question. I've personally shifted my opinion on it over the last couple of years. If you asked me that 2 years ago, I would have said, oh, this is such a problem, we need to make sure we have the policies in place. And I was maybe not so for open models. But then I realized that we could just stop development now, and the models that already exist out there are already doing lots of harm, and they're out in the wild, like they're not controllable except by penalty. So we do need smart regulation on what is possible or not. We see, a lot of deep fakes, we see discrimination and bias potentially from models, and disinformation, and all of those kind of things do need some policy regulation. But just saying, okay, no more open models, close everything now, we actually can't control it because the genie is already out of the bottle with models. So we might want to look to what is open science, at least in computing, been good for open source, is really understanding the software and making it more reliable and moving the field forward. And so there's a trade-off between those, and I think that trade-off has shown that that's probably much more important than trying to close a thing that you probably can't close.
Yeah, it seems that, at least pragmatically, the policies that are in place now are very kind of broad and not too constraining. And then I think that we're going to see kind of a narrowing down of the policies over time. I don't think that it's like before the policies and after. It's like an iterative process where they start off being pretty lenient and then kind of narrow in.
I guess I'm fundamentally a techno-optimist, which I know is a minority opinion these days. But like many technologies, things are always scary. And then they sort of are they're sort of overhyped at the beginning and kind of underhyped in the long run. And the ways those large effects will happen are always a little oblique relative to people's fears at the time. So I'm sure there will be enormous effects of any new technology on society, but I guess you just have to start somewhere. And for me, I start in that these are great opportunities for us to make the world better, and I'm hopeful that will be something we can pursue, basically. And I pretty much think the more opportunities and chances people have to contribute, the better it will be, basically.
Okay, we'll do one final question.
Thank you, Lisa.
You have the microphone already. So.
I do. See, hearkening back to earlier part of this discussion, I think there's one area where we academics have little or no need to justify our existence, and we have very little competition, and that is in this little thing called education. And so my question is, where should we be thinking about changing the way we educate people? Maybe starting even in the earlier grades, but certainly for undergraduates. What are the implications of this rather seismic change that we're talking about here for that little thing called education?
I mean, we certainly have to change the way we do education, right? Somebody can have a personal assistant that can answer anything for them, which is great, but a lot of our education system is based on you regurgitating knowledge, on some test, or you writing some essay overnight. Like, this has changed, so we have to change both how we teach and how we evaluate. I don't have the answer to that. I'm not even sure our friends in the GSE have the answer to that. I like to say I'm glad my kids aren't young kids right now, because I think the schools are going to be in disarray for the next 5 years as we start to figure out what works and doesn't work. But in 10 years, I think we'll look back and think we're educating people much better than we were 10 years ago, but we still have to figure out how to use this technology in new ways, which requires changing how we teach and how we evaluate. And I think one extra benefit of this is the education system, especially K through 12, is very hard to change. It's very hard to bring new ideas in. And there's probably many great ideas that graduate schools of education have proven this works and had a hard time ever getting through the door with it. Well, the door is going to open because AI is going to force people to have to change. And so maybe even some of those ideas that have nothing to do with AI are also going to get into our educational system during this big rethink about education. So I'm pessimistic, kind of like in the short term about the disruption, but I think in the long term it's actually going to be great. I don't know what the answer is, though. If you have an answer for my course, I'd love to hear it, because we had to have an AI policy and it changed from their policy last year. When is it okay and when is it not, and we're evolving as we learn. And I suspect a lot of us are in the same place, but there's going to be those who come up with some great ideas, and then the rest of us will copy them.
Yeah, I think this is potentially a really great opportunity for education to both use the tools as educational tools, but also to shake up how we do things. Rather than having a strict no AI policy, we can try to be more creative in thinking of, new ways that we're going to evaluate student progress that allows us to use these as tools to think in new ways, and I guess maybe initiate a paradigm shift of the education system.
Yeah, I mean, the education system, education, especially at large scale, is a really new feature of humanity. And so we're just probably at the beginning of our ability to do amazing things there. And so, maybe AI, I can imagine a future where people will look back and they can't even imagine what education would be like without some tools that are, not even in people's minds yet, but maybe will be soon. And actually, you may know more about it than I do, but there's a huge amount of stuff going on at here, at the university to do AI in education. There's folks in computer science like Chris Peach and Emma Brunskill and Noah Goodman. There's Judy Fan and Jason Yateman and Nick Haber, and Nick is in the School of Education. People just doing this is a problem where people are thinking so interestingly about those topics that I feel like it's one of those places where my tech optimism somehow comes out. As I think that maybe in the short run there'll be some disruptions, but there's so much better we could be doing, and that hopefully will bring it out. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for your attention and your interest and your wonderful questions. And let's thank our wonderful panelists again.